Interrogations are a vital part of police work, as this is where the details of any case are discussed and the parties involved are identified. In some cases, they can be rather mundane, as the details are pretty straightforward and the case isn't very complicated. There are some compelling police interrogations, however, that bring out chilling and often unnerving details about a crime that was committed, and in some of the more successful cases, police are able to obtain a confession. Number 5. Early on the 1st of November, 2001, 48-year-old Keith Heitholt's life was ended in the parking lot of the Columbia Daily Tribune. Ryan Ferguson worked for the newspaper as a sports editor, and coworker Michael Boyd would later tell police that he'd last spoken to him in the parking lot between 2:12 and 2:20 a.m. When the building's janitor, Shauna Ornt, stepped outside for a cigarette, she saw two men near Heitholt's car, and she immediately went back inside to get her supervisor, Jerry Trump. The two men were still there, and they yelled at the two janitors that someone was hurt near the car. They then left the scene via a nearby alley before police were called. During the previous night, Ryan Ferguson and his friend, Charles Erickson, had been attending Halloween parties in the area, and Erickson, having been under the influence of alcohol and other controlled substances, had no recollection of the latter part of the evening. When the crime was covered in the media again 2 years later, he began to worry if he may have been involved, since he thought a composite sketch of the suspects resembled him. He confided in his friends Nick Gilpin and Art Figueroa, and they decided to go to the police. He would eventually tell investigators that he believed he and Ferguson had robbed Heitholt for drinking money, and the two men were arrested. During the compelling police interrogation, Ferguson would state that he wasn't present at the scene that morning, but he's repeatedly accused of being deceptive, and that his story doesn't fit. Since Erickson had already implicated him in the crime, police found it hard to believe that Ferguson wasn't involved, and stated that Erickson would seem more credible at their trial, since he was being more forthcoming. Despite the fact that he maintained his innocence, he would be sentenced to 40 years in prison. In 2012, however, both Erickson and Jerry Trump would admit that they had lied at Ferguson's trial, and after spending nearly 10 years in jail, his conviction was vacated in November of 2013. Number 4. In a truly unnerving police interview, Aaron Quinn from Vallejo, California, is seen recounting the events of the 23rd of March, 2015, when his girlfriend, Denise Huskins, was kidnapped by a then unknown man. He explains that the man told him to stay in his house, and that there would be cameras recording him to ensure that he didn't contact anyone. Detective Matthew Mustard, who was conducting the interrogation, seems more interested in the couple's relationship, since Quinn and Huskins had been having issues after she found out that he was still in contact with his former fiancée. On the evening before the kidnapping, the couple had been discussing a fresh start, and Quentin told police that he woke up in the early hours of the morning after he had heard a voice saying, "Wake up, this is a robbery. We're not here to hurt you." After being tied up, the couple was placed in a closet and had swimming goggles covered in duct tape placed over their eyes to block their sight. They also had headphones placed on their ears with pre-recorded messages stating that they would be sedated. After asking Quinn a few questions, however, the intruder suddenly realized that Huskins was not the woman he was looking for, and stated that he had made a mistake, as he was looking for Quinn's ex-fiancée. He then decided to take Huskins for 48 hours, during which time Quinn was to perform certain tasks while being watched remotely through a camera. When Quinn asked for a blanket, the man stated that he was wearing a wetsuit and hadn't realized how cold it was. Before leaving, the kidnapper stated that if Quinn contacted police, Huskins' life would be taken. He would eventually manage to remove the goggles, but the sedative had started to take effect and he fell asleep. When he woke up, he found that the man had sent messages demanding two payments of $8,500, and he responded, But when he didn't hear anything back, he panicked and called his brother, an FBI agent, who told him to contact 911. Quinn says it was clear from the offset that police didn't believe his story, and even stated in the interrogation that he knows it sounds implausible. Detective Mustard would tell him that he didn't buy his story, and that there were no quote-unquote frogmen who had entered his house, implying that he had harmed Huskins. But even when Huskins was released on the 25th of March, police still believe that the kidnapping was a hoax. The kidnapper, however, took exception to this and emailed a local newspaper detailing the crime and telling police to apologize for their statements. It would eventually come to light that the kidnapper was a man named Matthew Muller, and that he had actually intended to kidnap Quinn's ex. He would be arrested and sentenced to 40 years in prison. Number 3. Dennis Rader, better known as the BTK Killer, is responsible for ending the lives of 10 people between 1974 and 1991 in Wichita and Park City, Kansas. While he was being sought, he would send taunting letters to police and newspapers in which he recounted the details of his crimes. But investigators were left stumped as to the killer's identity, and by 2004, the case had gone cold. This is when Rader started communicating with local media. In March of that year, he sent a letter to the Wichita Eagle in which he admitted to ending the life of Vicky Wagerly. Wagerly had not been considered a victim of BTK up until that time, and DNA samples that had been collected at the crime scene were now considered vital evidence in catching the serial killer. Hundreds of men from the area were tested, but to no avail. In one of his letters to police, he asked if a floppy disk that he wanted to send could be traced back to him, and they answered via a newspaper that it couldn't. They did, however, find metadata from a document that was last modified by someone named Dennis, containing the words Christ Lutheran Church on the disk. An internet search revealed that Rader was president of the church council, and when they drove by his house, they spotted his black Jeep Cherokee, the same type that had been seen in surveillance footage at a site where he had left a cereal box in the back of a pickup truck. This was all circumstantial evidence, however, and police decided to obtain a DNA sample from Rader's daughter. The results showed a familial match, and he was arrested. During his chilling interrogation, a detective reminds him that there's no way he can refute the DNA evidence. And after a short pause, Rader finally confesses by saying, "I guess you got me, I'm BTK." He would ultimately be sentenced to life in prison. Number 2. On the 19th of July, 2018, Michael Drejka had just appeared at a convenience store in Clearwater, Florida, when he noticed a car that was parked in a disabled parking spot. He would later tell police during his compelling interrogation that this was one of his pet peeves, and he confronted Brittany Jacobs, who was sitting in the vehicle. The car belonged to Marquise McLaughlin, who was inside the store with his young son. He realized what was going on outside and walked up to Drejka, shoving him to the ground. At this point, Drejka produced a firearm, causing McLaughlin to back up, but Drejka discharged his weapon, ultimately ending McLaughlin's life. During his interrogation, Drejka told police that McLaughlin had taken a step towards him, and this is why he decided to retaliate. He would use Florida's Stand Your Ground law as justification for the incident, stating that he felt his life was in danger. Drejka was released shortly after his interrogation, drawing protests and criticisms from members of the community and from people across the country. When it was later discovered that Drejka had threatened 3 other drivers with the same weapon on previous occasions, he was formally charged and arrested, though he denied the allegations. Drejka's trial started on the 19th of August, 2019, and he decided against using the Stand Your Ground law as a defense. On the 10th of October, he was found guilty and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Number 1. The case of Dahlia Dippolito is one full of deception, lies, and video evidence that includes some very compelling interrogation footage and first-rate police work. In 2009, Dahlia was married to Mike Dippolito, an ex-convict who was out on probation for stock fraud. He had continual run-ins with the law after they got married, on one occasion being questioned after an anonymous tipster told police that he was dealing in illegal substances. He became worried that he would end up in jail again and decided to transfer the title of his house to Dahlia in order to protect his assets. But unbeknownst to Mike, it was Dahlia who had made the call, and this had all been part of a plan that she had devised. She decided to approach her ex-boyfriend, Mohammed Shihadeh, and asked if he knew anyone who would carry out a hit on Mike. He said that he did, but instead contacted police and told them of her plans. They were skeptical at first, but decided to investigate by placing a hidden camera in Shihadeh's car and filming a meeting with Dahlia. On the 30th of July, the two met in a gas station parking lot, where he told her that he had someone for the job and that she could meet him 2 days later. Officer Whitey Jean went undercover, posing as the hitman, and their conversation was filmed once again, Dahlia stating that she was 5,000% sure that she wanted her husband done away with. She then handed him $7,000, and they arranged for her to be away from the house on the morning of the 5th of August. She stated that she would be at the gym, giving her a solid alibi. As arranged, she left the house that morning at 6 a.m., and police set up a fake crime scene afterward, informing Mike of what was going on. They then phoned Dahlia and asked her to return to the house as there had been an incident, and when she arrived, she broke down in tears when told that her husband was no longer alive. She was then taken to the police station under the guise of identifying a suspect, and while being interviewed, Sergeant Paul Sheridan brought Whitey Jean into the room and claimed that he was seen fleeing the house. Dahlia denied ever having seen him before. Police then revealed to her that her husband was in fact still alive, and he was brought to the room's doorway. A shocked Dahlia can be heard sobbing and asking him to come to her, but he replies that he had seen everything she did and that he couldn't help her anymore. Moments later, Dahlia was taken into custody and charged with the solicitation of first-degree murder. Following 2 trials, she would eventually be found guilty and sentenced to 16 years behind bars. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.